Elias Kane leaned back in the cockpit of the Aegis, the hum of the ship's quantum core vibrating faintly through his seat. Beyond the viewport, space stretched out infinitely, a void of stars and swirling dust clouds, beautiful and utterly monotonous. He drummed his fingers on the armrest, matching a rhythm only he could hear, his thoughts drifting between the boredom of his patrol route and the faint hope that something interesting might happen. Patrol report. Day 84. Elias muttered into the ship's recorder, his voice laced with mock professionalism. Outer rim of Earth-controlled space. No hostile activity, no alien contact, not even a wayward asteroid to break up the monotony. Highlights of the week include finishing the crossword in record time and learning the ship's AI doesn't appreciate sarcasm. The Aegis responded with a polite but pointed chime. Its AI wasn't advanced enough to speak, but the subtle tone carried its usual brand of disapproval. Elias smirked. "Oh, don't give me that," he said, stretching in his seat. "You know as well as I do, this patrol is a glorified milk run. If Earth Command wanted something exciting, they'd have sent us to the Andromeda line." The cockpit was a minimalist design, all sleek panels and softly glowing interfaces. The Aegis was humanity's first experimental quantum fighter, a marvel of cutting-edge technology designed to manipulate probability itself. To most pilots, it was an honor to be assigned to it. To Elias, it was another way to annoy the higher-ups with his disregard for protocol. He glanced at the radar display, its clean grid empty except for the occasional flicker of asteroid fragments. It was routine. Too routine. He sighed, reaching for the mug of cold coffee balanced precariously on the console. Then the radar pinged. Elias froze mid-sip, his gaze snapping to the display. A single blip materialized at the edge of the grid, faint but unmistakable. He leaned forward, his heart quickening as another appeared, and then another. Within moments, the screen lit up with dozens of contacts, clustered in tight formation. "What the hell?" he muttered, setting the mug down with a sharp clink. The Aegis's AI chimed again, this time more urgently. The holographic display projected a 3D model of the fleet, their sleek, alien ships moving with military precision. Their hulls shimmered with an iridescent sheen, like oil slicks under sunlight, and their energy readings spiked well beyond anything Earth's fleet could muster. Elias's gut tightened. This wasn't a random anomaly. This was a war fleet. "Well," he said, straightening in his seat, "looks like I finally got my wish." His fingers danced across the control panel, activating a passive scan. The holograms updated in real time, displaying data that made his stomach sink. 27 ships, including a massive dreadnought at the center, each one bristling with enough firepower to level a planet. He swallowed hard. No way this is a friendly visit. The comms channel crackled faintly as he opened a secure link to Earth Command. "Aegis to Control. This is Commander Elias Kane reporting multiple unidentified contacts in Earth-controlled space. Transmitting sensor data now. Recommend immediate readiness." He waited for a response, his gaze flicking back to the radar. The fleet was closing in, their formation tightening like the jaws of a predator. The comms remained silent. "Of course," Elias muttered, running a hand through his dark hair. "The one time I need you guys to answer." The holograms shimmered again, showing weapon signatures powering up across the alien ships. Elias's blood ran cold as he realized they weren't just passing through. They were preparing to engage. "Okay," he said, exhaling slowly. "Time for Plan B." Switching to an open channel, Elias activated his external comms. His voice rang out across all frequencies, calm but edged with defiance. "Unidentified fleet. This is Commander Elias Kane of the Earth Space Force. You're currently trespassing in Earth-controlled space. State your intentions, or I'll have to assume you're here for a fight." The response was almost immediate. His cockpit filled with a deep, guttural voice as a hologram flickered to life, a towering alien figure clad in ornate armor that gleamed like polished obsidian. Its face was insectoid, with sharp mandibles and compound eyes that glowed faintly in the dim light. "I am Admiral Krax of the Kryaxian Empire," the alien declared, its voice a resonant growl that sent a shiver down Elias's spine. Your species has been deemed inferior. Surrender your planet, and we shall spare your lives." Elias arched an eyebrow, his lips curling into a wry smile. "Wow, straight to the planetary conquest speech, huh? No pleasantries, no, 'how's the weather?' Kinda rude, don't you think?" Crax's mandibles twitched, his glowing eyes narrowing. "Your insolence will not be tolerated. You face the might of an empire that has conquered 1,000 worlds. Defiance is futile." Yeah, I've heard that one before," Elias said, leaning back in his seat. "Let me guess. This is the part where you threaten me with annihilation and expect me to roll over. Sorry to disappoint, but I'm not much of a kneeler." The Admiral's gaze darkened, his mandibles clicking in irritation. "You jest, but your fate is sealed. Surrender now or perish." Elias's smirk widened. "Well, since you're offering options, I think I'll go with option 3. Make you regret coming anywhere near Earth." As he spoke, his fingers flicked a series of switches, activating the Aegis's advanced systems. The cockpit lights dimmed as the quantum core began to hum louder, its faint pulse resonating through the ship. Holographic displays updated in real time, showing the Crayaxian fleet's energy signatures and shield frequencies. "Listen, Crax," Elias said, his tone suddenly serious. "I don't know what intel you've got on Earth, but let me give you a little lesson in humanity. We don't just roll over when someone points a gun at us. We fight back. And when you think you've beaten us, that's when we hit the hardest." The Admiral tilted his head, his compound eyes flickering with curiosity. "Bravado will not save you." "Maybe not," Elias said, gripping the controls as the Aegis's systems reached full power. "But it sure makes this a lot more fun." The Crayaxian ships surged forward, their weapons glowing with ominous light. Elias gritted his teeth, adrenaline coursing through him as he prepared for the impossible fight ahead. "Time to show them what one human can do," he muttered, pushing the throttle forward. The Aegis roared to life, its engines flaring as it streaked toward the incoming fleet. The battle had begun. The Aegis surged forward like a bolt of lightning cutting through the dark expanse of space. Elias gripped the controls tightly, his knuckles white as the ship's quantum engines roared beneath him. The Crayaxian fleet loomed ahead, their formation a wall of shimmering black ships that radiated menace. Each vessel bristled with weaponry, glowing faintly with energy that promised annihilation. "All right, boys," Elias muttered under his breath, the hum of the quantum core vibrating through the cockpit. "Let's see how well you play with others." The Aegis's radar display lit up as the Crayaxian ships locked their weapons on him. Alarms blared in the cockpit, flashing red across every panel. Elias's eyes darted across the readouts, his mind racing. The dreadnought at the center of their formation pulsed with energy, a predator watching its prey. "Incoming fire detected," the Aegis's AI chimed in with emotionless precision. "No kidding," Elias snapped, slamming the throttle to maximum. The ship lurched forward, and he felt the acceleration press him against the seat as streaks of plasma tore through the void where he'd been a second earlier. The first barrage screamed past him, close enough that the cockpit's exterior dimmed to compensate for the intensity. Elias rolled the Aegis, diving sharply to avoid another salvo. The stars blurred, and his stomach churned as he pulled into a tight corkscrew maneuver. "They're not wasting time, are they?" he muttered. His voice carried a sharp edge, but the spark in his eyes betrayed his exhilaration. The Aegis's holographic display updated in real time, showing the Crayaxian ships spreading out like a predatory net. They moved with terrifying coordination, their smaller frigates flanking to box him in, while the dreadnought's massive cannons charged with a deep, ominous hum. "Admiral Crax, I gotta hand it to you," Elias said, opening the comms channel. "You sure know how to make a guy feel welcome. You've got fireworks, a light show, but I think your hospitality's a little aggressive." The Admiral's holographic image flickered into view on Elias's display. His mandibles clicked in frustration, his glowing eyes narrowing as he hissed, "Your insolence will be your undoing, human." "Funny," Elias quipped, diving under a Crayaxian destroyer and narrowly avoiding its plasma turrets. I was just about to say the same to you. He flicked a switch on the console, and the Aegis's quantum core pulsed brighter. The ship shuddered faintly as it shifted into its experimental state, phasing slightly out of sync with reality. For the Cryaxian fleet, that meant their targeting systems suddenly had to deal with an enemy that flickered between positions. The dreadnought fired a massive energy blast, a beam of pure destruction that illuminated the void. Elias's heart pounded as the Aegis blinked out of its path, reappearing several hundred meters to the side in a flicker of light. The beam sailed harmlessly past, dissipating into the blackness. "Yeah, that's not going to work," Elias taunted, weaving through the chaos. "You guys might want to upgrade your software." Behind him, the smaller Cryaxian frigates closed in, their formation tightening like a pack of wolves circling their prey. Elias glanced at the holographic readout, his smirk fading as he realized they were trying to herd him into the dreadnought's line of fire. "Not bad," he muttered. "But two can play that game." His fingers danced over the controls, activating the Aegis's decoy systems. A sudden burst of light and sound erupted from the ship, and 3 identical copies of the Aegis appeared, shimmering like mirages in the starlight. The decoys darted off in different directions, their movements perfectly mimicking Elias's. The Cryaxian frigates hesitated, their formation faltering as their targeting systems struggled to differentiate between real and fake. Elias seized the opportunity, diving between 2 of the ships and letting the decoys distract their fire. "Psychological warfare," he said, grinning as a plasma blast obliterated one of his decoys. "Gotta love it." The dreadnought, however, wasn't fooled. Another blast from its main cannon tore through space, forcing Elias to pull the Aegis into a stomach-lurching barrel roll. The ship groaned under the strain, the cockpit rattling as he pushed it to its limits. "Come on, girl," he muttered, patting the console. "Just hold together a little longer." The holographic display flickered as the Aegis's AI highlighted a critical piece of information. The dreadnought's shields fluctuated briefly with each shot, leaving a tiny window of vulnerability. "Well, isn't that interesting?" Elias murmured, his eyes narrowing. He opened the comms channel again, broadcasting to the entire Cryaxian fleet. "Hey, Cracks, quick question. You ever hear the one about overconfidence?" The Admiral's mandibles clicked furiously. "You mock us while your destruction is assured. Surrender now, and your death may be painless." "Tempting offer," Elias replied, rolling the Aegis to avoid another barrage. "But I think I'll pass. You see, I've got this little thing called a plan." With a flick of a switch, he routed power to the ship's weapon systems. The quantum core pulsed brighter, the Aegis's hull glowing faintly as its experimental technology reached full activation. Elias angled the ship toward the dreadnought, his focus razor-sharp. "Time to see if this thing is as good as the eggheads promised." He dove straight at the dreadnought, his engines screaming as the massive ship loomed larger in the viewport. The Cryaxian turrets opened fire, plasma bolts streaking past him in every direction. One blast grazed the Aegis's shields, sending a jolt through the cockpit. But Elias didn't flinch. The dreadnought's cannon began charging again, its energy signature building to a crescendo. Elias's heart pounded, his hands steady on the controls as the targeting reticle blinked red. Almost! The cannon fired, and Elias jerked the controls hard to the right. The Aegis phased briefly, the beam slicing through empty space as he reappeared just inside the dreadnought's shield radius. For a fraction of a second, the ship's systems screamed in protest as he pushed them beyond their limits. He fired. The quantum-enhanced plasma blast struck the dreadnought's port shield generator, a pinpoint hit that sent shockwaves rippling through the massive vessel. The explosion illuminated the void, and Elias's display lit up with a cascade of damage reports from the enemy ship. "Gotcha," he whispered, pulling the Aegis into a steep climb as debris rained down below. The Cryaxian fleet faltered, their formation breaking as the dreadnought's systems struggled to compensate. Elias grinned, his adrenaline surging as he surveyed the chaos. "Your move, Admiral," he muttered, ready for whatever came next. Elias's fingers moved with practiced precision, recalibrating the Aegis's systems as the dreadnought reeled from the damage he had inflicted. Sparks danced along the edges of its massive hull, its once impenetrable shields flickering erratically. The smaller Cryaxian ships that had been closing in scattered, their formation dissolving as the fleet tried to regroup. "Admiral Crax," Elias said, reopening the comms channel with a smug grin. "I gotta hand it to you. You guys sure know how to take a hit. I mean, most fleets would have run home crying by now, but here you are, still trying to look intimidating. It's almost cute." The holographic display of Crax reappeared, his compound eyes narrowing with fury. Behind him, the bridge of the dreadnought was a flurry of activity, Cryaxian officers scuttling back and forth in chaos. His mandibles clicked rapidly, his voice a low growl. "Your defiance grows tiresome, human." "Really? I thought you'd appreciate the effort." Elias rolled the Aegis into a tight curve, dodging a volley of plasma fire from a nearby frigate. "I mean, it's not every day you get to go up against a guy who's actively rewriting the laws of physics." "You mock forces beyond your comprehension," Crax hissed. "Your insolence will be the death of you." "Yeah, you keep saying that," Elias replied, his voice dripping with mock sincerity. "But so far the scoreboard looks pretty one-sided. Maybe you should fire your strategist." He cut the channel with a flick of his wrist, his smirk fading as his focus shifted to the task at hand. The Cryaxians were faltering, but they weren't beaten. Not yet. The holographic display updated, highlighting the movements of the remaining ships. They were regrouping, their smaller vessels forming protective rings around the dreadnought as its systems stabilized. "All right, think, Kane," he muttered, scanning the battlefield. "They've got the numbers, the firepower, and probably a backup plan or two, but I've got this shiny toy." The Aegis hummed in response, its quantum core glowing faintly, as if in agreement. Elias's eyes narrowed. The ship wasn't just a weapon, it was a statement, a declaration that humanity didn't play by anyone else's rules. And today, that statement was going to hit like a freight train. He engaged the decoy systems again, sending out a fresh wave of shimmering duplicates. The Cryaxian targeting systems struggled, their weapons firing at the illusions as Elias dove into the fray. Plasma bolts lit up the void like a deadly fireworks display, streaks of blue and green crisscrossing the battlefield. "Let's keep you guessing," Elias said, his voice calm despite the chaos. He maneuvered the Aegis through the crossfire, his movements precise and unpredictable. One moment, he was darting between two frigates, and the next, he was diving beneath the dreadnought's shadow. The smaller ships broke formation, each trying to track the real Aegis. Their confusion was palpable, their movements erratic as they turned on each other in a desperate attempt to gain the upper hand. One frigate's plasma bolt struck a nearby cruiser, the resulting explosion sending debris careening through the void. "Friendly fire," Elias quipped. "You love to see it." As the Cryaxians scrambled, the Aegis's sensors picked up a new energy surge from the dreadnought. Elias's stomach tightened. Whatever they were planning, it wasn't going to be subtle. The holographic display lit up with a warning. The dreadnought was charging a weapon far larger than anything it had deployed so far. The energy reading spiked dangerously, the ship's massive hull glowing with an ominous red hue. "Uh-oh," Elias muttered. "Looks like the big guys had enough." The Aegis's AI chimed in. "High-energy weapon detected. Estimated impact radius. Catastrophic." "No kidding," Elias said, pulling the ship into a sharp climb to gain altitude. "What's the recharge time on that thing?" The AI displayed a countdown. 30 seconds. 30 seconds? Elias's mind raced. "All right, let's see if we can't ruin their day before then." He angled the Aegis toward the dreadnought, the ship's engines flaring as he pushed it to full speed. The smaller Cryaxian ships moved to intercept, their plasma turrets blazing. Elias weaved through the firestorm, the Aegis blinking in and out of existence as its quantum systems worked overtime. "Come on, girl," he muttered, sweat beading on his brow. "Just a little closer." The dreadnought loomed ahead, its charging weapon glowing brighter with each passing second. Elias's grip tightened on the controls as the countdown ticked down. 20 seconds. 15. He activated the Aegis's probability manipulator, the ship shimmering as it phased partially out of sync with reality. For the Cryaxian gunners, this meant their targeting systems were utterly useless. Plasma bolts passed harmlessly through the void where the Aegis had been a moment earlier. "Almost there," Elias whispered, his voice taut with focus. At 5 seconds, he fired. The Aegis's quantum-enhanced plasma cannon roared to life, the energy beam streaking toward the dreadnought's glowing weapon port. The shot struck true, and the resulting explosion lit up the battlefield like a miniature supernova. The shockwave rippled outward, sending the smaller Cryaxian ships tumbling as the dreadnought's weapon overloaded. Elias pulled the Aegis into a steep climb, the ship groaning under the strain as the explosion engulfed the space below. The cockpit rattled violently, alarms blaring as the Aegis's shields absorbed the brunt of the blast. When the light faded, Elias glanced at the display. The dreadnought was still there, but its weapon was offline, its hull scorched and battered. The smaller ships were in disarray, their formation shattered. He exhaled sharply, his hands trembling slightly as the adrenaline coursed through him. That was way too close. The comms crackled to life again, and Admiral Crax's voice filled the cockpit, seething with rage. "You insignificant insect! You dare—" "Dare?" Elias interrupted, his tone laced with sarcasm. "Buddy, I'm just getting started." He cut the channel, his grin returning as he angled the Aegis for another pass. The Cryaxians were on the ropes, and he wasn't about to let them recover. Not now. Not ever. "Time to show them what humans are really made of," Elias said, his voice steady and defiant as he dove back into the fray. Elias gripped the controls tighter as he dove the Aegis toward the battered Cryaxian fleet. The battlefield was a swirling storm of chaos, shattered ships, burning debris, and panicked movements from the remaining alien vessels. But the dreadnought was still there, defiant in the heart of it all. Its scorched hull smoldered, its shields flickering like dying embers, yet its size and presence loomed like an unbroken monolith of power. "That thing just doesn't know when to quit," Elias muttered, wiping sweat from his brow. He pulled the Aegis into a sharp bank to avoid a streak of plasma fire from a desperate Cryaxian frigate. The ship's quantum systems hummed beneath him, their energy buzzing faintly through the cockpit, a reminder of the ship's limits and the narrow line he was walking. "Admiral Crax!" Elias called, reopening the comm channel. His voice carried both a grin and a threat. "I've got to give it to you. You've got some serious staying power, but tell me, how's that ego of yours holding up? I mean, it's got a sting being outplayed by a single fighter." Crax's hologram blinked into view, his mandibles twitching with barely contained fury. The alien admiral's compound eyes glowed with hatred, his voice a guttural growl. "Your arrogance will not save you, human. This ends now." Elias smirked, rolling the Aegis in a tight barrel maneuver to avoid another blast from a Cryaxian destroyer. "That's what they all say. Spoiler alert, it usually doesn't end well for them." He killed the channel, cutting Crax off mid-sentence, and refocused on the battlefield. The dreadnought had regained some semblance of control, its massive engines burning bright as it repositioned at the center of the Cryaxian formation. Around it, the remaining frigates and cruisers formed a protective barrier, a last-ditch effort to shield their flagship. The Aegis's AI chimed softly, displaying the fleet's updated configuration on the holographic display. Elias studied it, his eyes narrowing as he traced potential flight paths. He couldn't brute force his way through, the dreadnought's defensive line was too tight. But he didn't need to, not when he had the quantum core on his side. "All right, girl," he murmured, his voice steady, but edged with determination. "Let's give them a little something to think about." He activated the Aegis's probability manipulator, the ship shimmering faintly as it phased partially out of sync with reality. For a moment, the Aegis split into 3 identical copies, each one darting off in a different direction. The Cryaxian fleet hesitated, their targeting system struggling to determine which was the real threat. Elias pushed the throttle forward, using the confusion to his advantage. The Aegis streaked toward the dreadnought, its engines flaring as he threaded the needle between 2 enemy frigates. Plasma bolts crisscrossed the void around him, the alien weapons glowing with deadly intensity. His ship rolled and weaved through the chaos, each maneuver impossibly precise. "Come on," he muttered under his breath, his focus razor-sharp. "Just a little closer." The dreadnought's weapons lit up, its massive cannons swiveling to track his approach. Elias's heart pounded, the adrenaline coursing through his veins as he pushed the Aegis into a steep climb. The ship groaned under the strain, its quantum systems flaring as he phased out of sync for a split second, dodging a direct hit. The cannon blast roared past him, tearing through the debris-strewn void and obliterating one of the Cryaxian frigates caught in the crossfire. The explosion rippled outward, the shockwave rattling the Aegis as Elias steadied the controls. "You're not making any friends, Admiral," Elias quipped, glancing at the holographic display. His grin widened as he noticed the flicker in the dreadnought's shield matrix, another tiny crack in their impenetrable facade. The Aegis's AI chimed again, this time with a new alert, an energy surge from the dreadnought's core. Elias's stomach twisted as he realized what was happening. They weren't just defending, they were preparing to end the fight, one way or another. The holographic display highlighted the source, the dreadnought's central reactor. If they were overcharging it, they weren't planning to win. They were planning to take him down with them. "Well, that's dramatic," Elias muttered, his mind racing. "All right, Kane, time for something equally stupid." He pulled the Aegis into a tight loop, dodging another volley of plasma fire as he circled back toward the dreadnought. The ship's engines screamed, the cockpit rattling as the quantum core hummed louder, its energy spilling into the systems around him. The Aegis wasn't just a fighter, it was a scalpel, and Elias was about to perform some emergency surgery. The Cryaxian frigates moved to intercept, their weapons blazing as they tried to block his approach. Elias gritted his teeth, diving beneath their formation and skimming the surface of the dreadnought's hull. Sparks flew as the Aegis brushed against its shields, the ship jolting violently before phasing out of sync again. "Close enough to kiss," Elias muttered, his fingers flying over the controls. He routed power to the ship's weapons, the targeting reticle locking onto the dreadnought's reactor core. It was a long shot, literally, but it was all he had. "All right, Cracks," he said, reopening the comms channel. "You've had your fun. Time to say goodnight." Crax's hologram flickered into view, his voice a venomous hiss. "You will burn with us, human." "Maybe," Elias replied, a dangerous gleam in his eyes, "but at least I'll look good doing it." He fired. The Aegis's plasma cannon roared to life, the beam streaking through the void and piercing the dreadnought's reactor core. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. The battlefield went silent, the only sound the faint hum of the quantum core beneath Elias's feet. Then the reactor exploded. The blast was blinding, a supernova of light and energy that consumed the dreadnought and everything around it. The shockwave slammed into the Aegis, sending the ship spinning wildly through the debris field. Alarms blared, the cockpit flashing red as Elias fought to regain control. "Come on, girl," he muttered through gritted teeth, his hands steady on the controls. "Stay with me." The ship leveled out, its systems sputtering but intact. Elias exhaled sharply, his chest heaving as he surveyed the aftermath. The dreadnought was gone, reduced to a field of glowing wreckage. The remaining Cryaxian ships were in disarray, their formation shattered and their morale broken. Elias grinned, his voice hoarse but triumphant. "And that's how you do it." The comms crackled faintly as the Cryaxian fleet began to retreat, their engines flaring as they fled into the void. Elias leaned back in his seat, the adrenaline still coursing through him as the battlefield fell silent. "Admiral Crax," he said, his voice laced with mock regret. "Hate to see you go, but love to watch you leave." The Aegis floated amidst the wreckage of the Cryaxian fleet, its hull battered but defiant, its quantum core humming faintly as it began to stabilize. Elias sat back in his cockpit, chest heaving as he let the moment wash over him. His hands, still gripping the controls, trembled slightly. The battlefield was eerily quiet now, the once ominous Cryaxian dreadnought reduced to a glowing debris field drifting silently in the void. "Well," he muttered, his voice cracking slightly, "that was a bit more than I signed up for." The Aegis's AI chimed softly, displaying a damage report on the holographic interface. The ship had taken a beating. Its shields were nearly depleted. Several subsystems were operating at reduced efficiency. and the quantum core had sustained mild instability during the final maneuver. Still, the ship had held together, proving itself in the crucible of combat. "Good girl," Elias said, patting the console affectionately. "You earned yourself a tune-up, maybe even a new paint job. Something flashy to show you're the baddest thing in the galaxy." He scanned the remnants of the Cryaxian fleet. The surviving ships were retreating, their sleek forms darting toward the far edges of the system. They moved erratically, their formation broken, their confidence shattered. It was a sight Elias would savor for a long time. "Not so tough now, are you?" he muttered, shaking his head. The comms crackled faintly, and Elias frowned. He adjusted the frequency, expecting it to be Earth Command finally responding. Instead, the holographic projection of Admiral Krax appeared, flickering and distorted. The alien's once imposing presence was diminished, his armor scorched, his compound eyes dull. Even through the static, Elias could see the defeat etched into every movement. "You think this is a victory, human?" Krax rasped, his voice a broken echo of its former power. "This is nothing. Our empire spans thousands of worlds. You have only delayed the inevitable." Elias smirked, leaning forward in his seat. "You sure about that, Krax? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like your fleet's tucked tail and run. And your flagship? Oh, right, it's cosmic confetti now." Krax's mandibles twitched, but his voice remained steady, as if clinging to the last shreds of his pride. "You may have won this battle, but you cannot comprehend the forces arrayed against you. The Cryaxian Empire is eternal." "Eternal, huh?" Elias tilted his head, a sharp grin spreading across his face. "Funny, you sound pretty mortal to me. Tell you what, why don't you run back to your empire and let them know Earth isn't interested in your little galactic takeover? In fact, let them know that next time, we'll be ready." He cut the channel before Krax could respond, watching as the projection dissolved into static. Leaning back, he exhaled deeply, the adrenaline beginning to wear off. The tension in his chest loosened slightly, though his muscles still ached from the intensity of the fight. The Aegis's AI interrupted his thoughts with a soft chime, displaying an alert from Earth Command. The message was delayed, but it was clear enough. "Fleet inbound. Hold position. Reinforcements arriving in 20 minutes." Elias barked out a laugh, shaking his head. 20 minutes, huh? Thanks for the backup, guys. Real punctual." The humor faded as he glanced out at the wreckage again. The scale of what had just transpired was starting to sink in. He was one man in one ship, and he'd just gone head-to-head with an armada. If he hadn't been piloting the Aegis, if the quantum core hadn't performed flawlessly, he wouldn't be sitting here now. "Hell of a first field test," he said softly, his tone more reflective. "Guess they'll finally have something interesting to put in the report." The minutes stretched into a surreal calm, the silence of the void broken only by the occasional groan of strained metal within the Aegis. Elias used the time to run diagnostics, patching what systems he could. The quantum core's readings were stable again, but the ship was limping. It had given everything it had in the fight, and it was clear the Aegis wasn't invincible. Not yet. As the first Earth Fleet ships appeared on his radar, Elias allowed himself a small sigh of relief. The sleek cruisers and destroyers fanned out across the battlefield, their presence a reassuring reminder that humanity wasn't alone. The comms crackled to life, and the familiar voice of Fleet Commander Hargrove filled his cockpit. "Commander Kane, this is Fleet Command," Hargrove said, his tone sharp but tinged with disbelief. "We're reading significant debris signatures in your vicinity. Can you confirm the status of the Cryaxian fleet?" Elias grinned, adjusting the comms for clarity. "Yeah, about that. They're gone. Dreadnought scrap metal, and the rest are in full retreat." There was a long pause before Hargrove responded. "You took out an entire Cryaxian fleet by yourself?" "With a little help from the Aegis," Elias replied, patting the console. "Let's just say they weren't ready for what this girl can do." Hargrove's voice was laced with both awe and exasperation. "Kane, I don't know whether to court-martial you or put you in for a medal." "Why not both?" Elias quipped, leaning back with a smirk. "I'd look great in cuffs and a ribbon." The fleet began sweeping the area. their scanners combing through the wreckage for any lingering threats. Elias watched the activity with a mixture of pride and exhaustion. He'd won, but the weight of what he'd just done was beginning to settle in his chest. This wasn't just a victory for him, it was a statement to the galaxy. As the Aegis was towed back toward the main fleet, Elias allowed himself to relax, the hum of the ship's systems fading into the background. He gazed out at the stars, his mind already racing with what came next. The Crayaxians wouldn't forget this day, and neither would he. Back on Earth, the debrief would be intense. The engineers would demand every detail about how the quantum core had performed, and the brass would dissect his every move. But in this moment, drifting through the void surrounded by the remnants of a battle he'd won against impossible odds, Elias allowed himself a small smile. "Let them come," he whispered, his voice steady and defiant. "We'll be ready."